look, a lot of you watching this right now, will be going through some form of grief. You'll have lost somebody that you love very much indeed, and you'll be wondering, as you process that grief, when it's going to go, when it's going to lift, when you're going to get back to some kind of normality. We've all been there. And there's one of Britain's most famous vicars, the Reverend Richard Coles, is now embarking on a story of strength and hope. He, of course, lost his beloved husband, David. It's 3 years ago now.
Well, in his new documentary, Good Grief, he explores the many different ways people cope with loss, from hugging sloths to travelling. Let's have a look. Reverend Richard joins us now. Morning to you.
Hi. Morning.
You know, as Richard was saying there, it's something that so many people go through, isn't it? And in many different ways. And I think a lot of times people find it hard to talk about or to chat to other people about. Is it possible to have a good grief? Is it just kind of a process you have to get through and it's always going to be horrible and painful and traumatic?
It's always going to be horrible and painful and traumatic, but there are better ways of doing it, I think. And it's surprising. It's something that happens to all of us. If you're lucky enough to share your life with someone who you love and who loves you, the chances are 50-50 that you're going to be a widow or a widower. And yet we're not very well prepared for it. And one of the things I've been interested in doing is looking at what's out there for people. All kinds of different things. People do it in all kinds of different ways. There's not one thing that works for everybody. But it's coming our way, so it makes sense, I think, to begin to get on terms with it if you can.
I remember I was 21 when my father died very suddenly. He was only 49. I was on honeymoon at the time, on my first marriage, and he just came home and dropped dead, basically. And it was an unbelievable shock. And I loved him very much, and I felt his loss incredibly keenly. And I remember looking back on it now, that as the grief was total, you know, and I was back at work after a couple of weeks, but it was still there. And I remember that actually the way it lifted was sort of in little jolts, little incremental jolts. And I can still remember a summer's morning, a year after he died, getting up and going to the shops and realising I hadn't thought about it for the first time, you know, in a 2-hour period. And I realised then that it was getting better. Did you find that with the loss of your partner, David? I know it's different.
I mean, it's not a smooth or an orderly process.
No, it's
and it
not.
is different for everybody. There's lots of stuff, and often you get a bit frustrated sometimes with people telling you what you should feel, because there's no should to what you feel, you just feel what you feel. What happens is, as time goes by, every day is another 24 hours without that person materially in your life, and you get used to that, I think, or you begin to get used to it. But you don't get better. People often say, and it's well-intentioned, oh, are you getting over it? And actually, you get over a cold. You don't get over this. You just learn to live with it in a new reality. And then sometimes, out of the blue, something will happen and you'll be destroyed for a second. But grief is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a tribute you pay to the people you love and who made your life.
What do you think the function of grief is? Why do we feel it so keenly?
I think it's just important. It's one of those huge life experiences that we need to kind of make solemn, I think. It's almost like, you know, weddings and baptisms and funerals. They exist because it's important for the world, as well as ourselves, to acknowledge the significance of what's happened. And those experiences, they're unique to us, but we all share them in one form or another. I mean, that's vicar experience speaking.
Of course, yeah.
And did you find one particular method? Because obviously you looked at all sorts of different ways, hugging sloths, boxing, and what's this? There was a cruise, a grief cruise, which I guess is an interesting way, because sometimes people don't want to go on holidays or find that sort of aspect difficult. But what was the one that stood out for you as being particularly beneficial?
Well, I would say hugging sloths is easier on the eye than on the nose, if I can put it that way. That's perhaps TMI.
Prepare yourself for going for that one, yeah.
The grief cruise was great because it was lots of people getting together, going literally on a journey together, doing workshops in the day. The best thing is actually getting alongside other people who've been through the same thing or are having the same experience, and kind of swapping notes. The thing I enjoyed most, funnily enough, was boxing. And I'm not Sonny Liston, to put it mildly, but I really enjoyed it, and I think partly it's the physicality of it. There's something about just expressing the anger that you inevitably feel was really good. And also, it's very different for men and women, I think. I mean, I'm generalising, but women tend to be much more comfortable talking about really difficult feelings. Men need some sort of distraction activity.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, is the common theme in all the things that you tried out, with the exception of just sitting and talking with other people who've also been bereaved, but, you know, hugging a sloth or doing kickboxing or boxing or whatever, is it just basically you're distracting the mind? You're giving yourself a break from thinking about this person that you've lost because you have to concentrate on something else for a few minutes?
I think that's partly it, and I think it just enables you to perhaps access emotions that are otherwise... I mean, grief is such a huge thing. saying. Often I've talked to people, they'd often say that they were devastated by the loss of a pet, but were sort of dry-eyed from the loss of a parent or a partner. I think that's because you can sort of get the loss of a pet, the whole thing you can sort of understand in one moment. The loss of a person is so huge that sometimes you can only get a fragment of it or a fraction of it at any given time. And over time you begin to become more acquainted with it. But you do have to get acquainted with it. It's a stranger knocking at the door, and you don't want to let the stranger in. You want to go and hide behind the sofa.
Yeah.
But the stranger's coming in anyway. So I think if you can open the door and begin to come to terms with it, that's probably a good way to do it.
And how much, for you, and you'll know this as in your work as a vicar, but for you, when you lost your partner, how much is denial a part of it? You know, to begin with, you simply cannot accept that this has happened.
No, and you keep going to the shop and buying for two.
Exactly, yeah.
And coming home and you're cooking for one. My freezer was full within about 3 weeks. And just stupid little things, flat-packed furniture. Torture if you're on your own. Never buy it if you've been widowed.
Shopping on your own.
Shopping on your own, all that stuff. And just the habits of looking over your shoulder, expecting them to walk into the house. Takes a while for that stuff to begin to shift.
And I think, I found when I lost my dad as well, sometimes, things would happen at different moments. Expect that to still happen, that even many years later, something will pop into your head or something will remind you, or you'll suddenly think, oh, there's something I need to do. And then you think, oh, no, I can't ring my dad to tell him. And so you can expect, actually, for that to come in unexpected ways.
Yeah. I was on holiday on the Isle of Tyree in Scotland a little while ago, and I heard an oyster catcher, which has got this kind of high-pitched, squeaky noise. And it was the soundtrack to a place we used to go and stay a lot. And for a moment, I was just completely undone by that sound. I hadn't seen it coming. But, that's not a bad thing. It's wonderful if you love someone. The delight they bring to your life is a wonderful thing. And the tribute you pay that is a tribute in grief when they're no longer there.
I do think the cruelest thing that the trick that the brain can play on you when you're recently bereaved is that you dream that the person's still alive.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful dream and a relief, and then you wake up and reality kicks in again. And that's always a bad morning. That's always a bad.
Did you find that your faith helped you? Or, some people then just can't understand how someone can have been taken from them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I never thought faith was a get-out-of-jail-free card, so I never expected it would spare me any of the tough stuff of life. Quite the opposite, actually. It in fact, empowers you to face that stuff, I think. I knew I wasn't going to be much good. I remember when David was dying in hospital, I went to the hospital chapel, and my prayer was, it wasn't really words, but was, I'm not going to be much good for a while, so over to you. But it never shook it. It's always been pretty steady state.
And I guess as a vicar over the years, you would have spent a lot of time talking to other people who've gone through grief. What was your, one bit of advice? What would you say to them that would kind of help them to get through it or help to put it in perspective?
Well, I'd say two things. One is that you're going to go a bit bananas, so don't worry about that. That's just going to happen. The second is people will tell you what you should feel. You feel what you feel. But the really important thing is, and this is not really my kind of language at all, but I learnt this on the grief cruise, reach out and share. If you can walk alongside other people who are walking the same journey that you're walking, then that's a really good thing.
Good point and good advice. Well, Good Grief, your documentary is on Channel 4 tonight at 10 p.m, so people can see it then. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks.